It's not a vehicle to earn more fiat gains. It's actually a vehicle to free oneself from the tyranny of the game that forces one to try to work for. I have a friend whose parents worked for 35 years in the real estate industry, right? They've built up a real estate portfolio. You take a family like that, where now especially their wealth is starting to be debased at a much more rapid rate than in the past. That family is going to have a hard time in a situation like that converting their 35 years of work, their wealth being tied up into what is supporting their life now. How do they convert that? How do they unwind 35 years of wealth accumulation through properties, the properties of which are supporting their day-to-day existence today? And I believe that that is going to happen at a greater and greater frequency. Bitcoiners will only let go of their Satoshis in the future more and more if there is something of huge value being delivered to them that they feel is worth letting go Satoshis for. It's not something I think, it's something that I absolutely know will happen. More people are going to start demanding Bitcoin, otherwise they're not going to give the service to you, or they're not going to get the item that you want. Bitcoiners in time are going to have to face the day when they will have to let go of some of their Bitcoin if they really want something, because the person with that thing will only demand the strongest thing in the universe.
Statistical mathematical fact never has been down, has broken every single record. There is no asset that has come close. It's the only thing in the industry that was not touched, that was not hacked, and it never fails doing what it promised in 2009. It's never
What's
failed.
the best performing asset the world has ever seen? And you'll find out that it's Bitcoin.
Hello, my fellow Bitcoiners, my fellow traders. I hope all is doing well. Welcome to, I guess, another one of my Twitter spaces. I have to say that while I do consider this Twitter space to be a test of sorts, I had done a number of Twitter spaces in the past, not many. They've all went fairly well. I still have to get a little bit accustomed to the Twitter spaces format, but I still consider this a test or so because I haven't done one in quite a while. But welcome. I've tried to be a bit more active as I promised during my last Twitter spaces. I think that took place maybe, well, I don't know, several months ago. But I did promise on that last Twitter spaces that I did that I would be a bit more active. And I think I've held my bargain. I think I've held myself to a good standard in terms of activity. Some people have actually suggested that I tweet a lot, but the tweets are, I try to keep them fairly pointed and fairly, I try to keep them fairly, I guess, focused on a specific narrative or so. I like to do my best to sort of spur conversation, spur interaction. I don't expect my tweets to be agreed on by every single person. I think that's the whole purpose, to spur discussion and to knock those differences around. It sort of helps all of us, I believe, to tighten up our own personal belief systems and our own personal narratives. So anyway, once again, welcome to another one of my Twitter spaces. Like I said, I do consider this a test. So anything basically goes. Now, the last time I wasn't quite sure how I could see your comments or what have you, but I did suggest that if you wanted me to say anything about a specific point or comment on something, that the best way I think would be, let me see here, let me take a quick look. I think the best way would be to comment on either the spaces here or on the announcement? I see no comments, but you know what? Let me start off by doing this. First of all, I do want it to be extraordinarily clear that in no way do I believe that I'm an authority on Bitcoin. In fact, I consider to be, for the most part, a babe in the woods. I started down the Bitcoin journey, I would say in earnest, about May of 2020. I made my first financial investment in Bitcoin in March of 2020 on the crash. Actually, the 12th and 13th were the days that I piled in for the first time after looking at the space or looking at Bitcoin for a number of months before that. That was the opportune moment for me, but what I actually had as an asset did not click with me or start to click with me until several months later, a couple of months later. And I consider having started going down what that proverbial Bitcoin rabbit hole, I would say in May, June, that something clicked and started to make me realize that this was no regular trade, that this was something different, that I had wrapped my hands around something that was so unique that it compelled me to sort of investigate a little more deeply. Prior to that, it was just going to be another trade for me. An intermediate term trade, not a short-term trade, but a trade nonetheless. Today, Bitcoin is not a trade for me. Bitcoin is freedom for me. Bitcoin is life to me. And it has had a very profound impact on my life. And it has caused a great deal of change in my life as well, all for the better, for the most part, not just from a financial point of view, because I do believe that Bitcoin is far more than buying something for $1 and selling it for $2. It's not a vehicle to earn more fiat gains. It's actually a vehicle to free oneself from the tyranny of the game that forces one to try to work for fiat gains. But anyway, I just wanted to make it clear that while I do speak strongly or tweet strongly at times, that does not come from a place or a space where I believe that I am some authority on Bitcoin. I believe that I am still very, very early along the path, but I do believe in a philosophy I want to share with you very quickly. I believe that no matter where you are in a journey, that there is always an opportunity to help those who are not quite at the place in the journey that you are. And I have always ascribed to the philosophy of the ancient Egyptians. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with that hieroglyphic, that famous hieroglyphic on the walls of the pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, where you have the Egyptian walking man. And so on that hieroglyphic, you know, where the Egyptian walking man has one hand or palm facing the heavens, and the other palm is behind him facing downward. And the Egyptian's feet are facing forward, as if the Egyptian is walking. So the Egyptian is looking forward, his feet are pointed forward, his right hand is pointed to the heavens, and his left hand is pointed downward behind him. And the intrinsic message in that hieroglyphic is that one has only the right to receive from those who are above him if at the same time is also giving to those who are beneath him. And that is the only way to move forward in life. Thus, the Egyptian man walks forward by giving to those beneath and also earning himself the right to receive from those above. And I've always tried to live based on that philosophy. And so that is basically all I'm trying to do here on Twitter. I do realize that at times I come in contact with people who are far more knowledgeable about this amazing technology than I am, and I have nothing to offer them. But what I'm trying to do with the audience that I think I have, the vast majority of which has not quite gotten bitten by the Bitcoin bug as of yet. And it's those people that I'm trying to address. And I believe at this particular point that the majority of my audience sort of fits that category. So that is whom I'm addressing most of the time. And despite the fact that sometimes I can come across very strongly, I do try to come across with the greatest intentions of all, which is to try to orange pill as many people that come in contact with me as possible. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I have a tremendous amount to learn. I'm still a baby in the woods. All right. So anyway, if anybody has anything they want me to address, or anything about anything I've said or tweeted, I'd love to take that. Otherwise, I'm going to actually pick and choose right now. And I have to imagine that there are some people who are actually responding and I can't see them. Again, guys, I do consider this somewhat of a test. I do have to get a lot more familiar with the Twitter Spaces format here. Let me just quickly check here if I can. No. I actually don't see. I don't see. All right, here. No, there's actually no one. Okay, that's fine. I hope everyone can hear me properly. But let me just do this. Let me take a comment that was actually just recently sent to me. And I wanted to flesh this comment out. I recently tweeted this. I'll quickly repeat it here. The poor, I tweeted this just a bit ago, the poor are arguably in a better position to take advantage of Bitcoin. Why? Because they're actually short fiat, while the rich are long fiat and are actually short Bitcoin. And I wanted to spur some conversation on this point. And I suspected that some people would sort of take it incorrectly. So this is my opportunity to sort of try to clarify my thoughts and give more flesh to that tweet. But let me just say this. I was a gold bug for the vast majority of my professional life, largely because my father was a gold bug. And what I did throughout my professional career is I took a fairly decent chunk of anything that I considered excess wealth, and I stored it in gold over the years. And we're talking, when I say over the years, I'm talking about over an 18 to 20 year period of just socking away a fairly decent chunk of the excess of what I felt that I would never really need to live in gold. Now, when I got bitten by the Bitcoin bug, I was gold rich and Bitcoin poor. I was also what some might consider to be fiat rich. I had all the traditional store of values that people of means put their excess in, from stocks to multiple homes in various different countries and so forth and so on. But My main store of value for a long while, I'd say, was gold. When I got bitten deep enough or hard enough by the Bitcoin bug, I actually wanted to reverse that scenario. But it actually took me, listen to this, it took me over a year to unwind just one of my stores of value properly, gold. It took me over a year to actually get out of my gold positions, all the documentation, all the storage arrangements, all the legal involved, all the tax consequences, and getting all of that straight. It took over a year for me to convert my gold holdings into Bitcoin. And so I want you to think about a relatively wealthy individual who has the vast majority of his wealth in harder assets that are based on the fiat standard. Maybe as much as 70 to 75% of his wealth is in a business. And so the person might be worth $4 million, but nearly 3 million of it is tied up into the business. And that person might have a home and a vacation home, where a big chunk of the remainder of that person's wealth of $4 million in total is tied up in equity in his home and tied up in equity of some sort, and maybe some vacation cottage or home somewhere, right? And so this person is rich by some people's standards, but can't actually, he's short Bitcoin because he has no Bitcoin, but he's fiat rich because his assets are denominated in fiat, yet the assets are so illiquid and so necessary for his or her daily survival, the home, the business, that it's not really possible right away, at least, to adopt a Bitcoin standard or to convert his wealth into Bitcoin, because it's tied up in things that can't be undone so quickly. Whereas that the individual that is poor, that is surviving, and I'm talking about poor, meaning living predominantly month to month, able to live okay, but not tremendously in the position of being able to build up massive amounts of wealth. But they live. That person is in a much better position to take advantage of Bitcoin than the other person that I just mentioned to you. All right? That person can start today. That person can decide today that whatever I don't need to live, whether it's $10 this week, $50 next week, $15 the following week, and I can start socking that away in Bitcoin. Now, of course, that takes some knowledge. It takes some understanding. It takes some understanding of the value proposition of Bitcoin first to be able to have the conviction to do that. But that was primarily my point. And you can take another scenario. I have a friend whose parents worked for 35 years in the real estate industry, right? They've built up a real estate portfolio of a variety of different properties, rental properties. The rents from these properties are basically their lifeline. This is what allows them to live. They live decently, but it's what allows them to live. And they're not extraordinarily wealthy by some standards, but they're okay. They've got 5 or 6 rental properties, and they live off of the income that those properties produce for them. Now, you take a family like that, where now, especially, their wealth is starting to be debased at a much more rapid rate than in the past. That family is going to have a hard time in a situation like that converting their 35 years of work, their wealth being tied up into what is supporting their life now. How do they convert that? How do they unwind 35 years of wealth accumulation through properties, the properties of which are supporting their day-to-day existence today? How do they reverse that? It can be done. It's not impossible, but it's going to take time, and in some cases, a long time. So, in a sense, wealthy people, and that's not, to some people, that's wealthy, 5 or 6 different properties, living without the need for worry from the income from those properties. That's considered wealthy by some. But how is the Bitcoin standard adopted so quickly by people like that? The wealthy are actually stuck far more than those who are not so wealthy, those who are not so tied in to the fiat standard, those who've not dedicated their lives to building up assets that are not so liquid, that just can't be turned on a dime and turned into Bitcoin. But the individual who's not tied down by those things has an advantage, in my point. And so I communicated this in somewhat of a very strong way, I should say. That was just to jar conversation, if you will. But that was the point I was trying to say. That Bitcoin can, the poor, and what I mean by the poor, I'm using that word in a very general sense to say those who have not amassed fiat wealth in a big way, those have a greater advantage in terms of quickly adopting Bitcoin into their lives. And this, I think, is largely missed by let's just call it Bitcoin Twitter, because the vast majority of people, let's face it, aren't in a situation like that. The vast majority of people are not connected to situations like that, so don't necessarily think about those things on a day-to-day basis. But I lived that. I lived that over a year trying to convert another asset into Bitcoin. And at the time I started that transition, Bitcoin was just around 10,000. Okay. And by the time I got Bitcoin, by the time I started to actually have the liquid version of my gold to start putting into Bitcoin with that portion, I was still putting into Bitcoin in a big way, but I wanted that into Bitcoin. Bitcoin was no longer $10,000 when I was able to start doing that. It was at 38,000. And I believe that my average price with my gold in Bitcoin was actually in the $40,000 range. That's how long it took for me to sort of unwind things. And so anyway, with that, from a fiat perspective, with that plowing into Bitcoin with my prior gold accumulation years, some might say I'm underwater. I don't look at it like that, but yes, from a fiat standard, from a fiat point of view, I am underwater with that. But anyway, that was my point of view. And another thing that another comment that was made regarding this tweet was that this individual sort of felt that I was off because, let me see what he said here. I can find it very quickly. Yeah, but how is the poor? So I think the comment was something to the effect, well, how is the poor going to actually get Bitcoin if it takes fiat to get Bitcoin? Well, first of all, when I say poor, once again, when I said poor, I was sort of generally talking about people that just don't have fiat wealth. I'm not talking about the person who barely can find food for dinner. I'm not talking about that level. That's a completely different level. I'm just talking about individuals who, or families who are basically just living month to month. They're okay, but they're living month to month, and they haven't gotten their lives to the point where they've been able to accumulate wealth. But at the same time, it's my belief, Bitcoiners, that in the not so distant future, I just don't believe that Bitcoin is going to be so readily available to purchase. I think that in my lifetime, and certainly in your lifetime, most of you are probably much younger than I am, I actually believe that Bitcoin just won't be for sale very frequently. We can see that starting from 2020, Bitcoin is a disappearing asset. You have an increasing number of people who are willing to purchase it and hodl it. We're at all-time new hodling highs. We've never been at a place where over 70% of all Bitcoin hasn't moved in a year. Increasingly, every cycle, a larger percentage of the people who get orange pilled on this asset just don't sell it. We're in the store of value phase. And in the same way, you don't see people walking around exchanging gold today. I just don't think that we'll see many people offering their Bitcoin for sale in the future. I actually will go as far as saying that I think that the exchange business is a very short-term lived business. I think the custodial business is a very long-term business, but the exchange business, they'll exist, but they'll exist for that'll be, in my opinion, a very niche. It'll be a very niche business. And the reason I believe this is because the asset's disappearing and a greater number of people want to just hold it. They'd rather spend the weak currency and hold the stronger thing. So with that being said, it's not that poor people will not have fiat to buy it. The only way you'll gain access to Bitcoin is to work for it, to deliver value for it, to do something of value for a Bitcoiner that is worth them letting go of their Satoshis. And I believe that that is going to happen at a greater and greater frequency. Bitcoiners will only let go of their Satoshis in the future more and more if there is something of huge value being delivered to them that they feel is worth letting go Satoshis for. Now, the other side of that is this. There are certain things that Bitcoiners might need and want in the future, but the only way they can get those things that they want or need is to give up the Bitcoin for it. And I'll give you a perfect example. I do accept fiat for many of my services. There are certain things that I will not accept fiat for, that today, this very day, if you want that from me, you're going to have to pay me in Bitcoin. Otherwise, hit the road, Jack. And guess what? People pay it. Even non-Bitcoiners pay it. They find a way to get Bitcoin to pay me for that service, a service that I will not accept anything for. That is going to happen, in my opinion, increasingly so. In fact, it's not something I think, it's something that I absolutely know will happen. I'm not the only one that's demanding Bitcoin for certain things. You're going to start demanding Bitcoin for certain things, all right? More people are going to start demanding Bitcoin. Otherwise, they're not going to give the service to you, or they're not going to get the item that you want. And so Bitcoiners in time are going to have to face the day when they will have to let go of some of their Bitcoin if they really want something, because the person with that thing will only demand the strongest thing in the universe. Now, think about this. Here's why I know this is coming. I believe that there's great odds in this cycle that Bitcoin becomes the most valuable asset on planet Earth outside of gold. Now, all things being equal, Apple is right now the most valuable asset on planet Earth outside of gold. It's worth roughly $3 trillion. Okay? Apple at $3 trillion valuation for Bitcoin right now is roughly 155,000. My math could be off a little bit, but it's 155,000 a coin makes Bitcoin supersede the value of Apple. Now, of course, I understand that's assuming that all things with Apple stay equal to today. That's assuming that the value of Apple doesn't go up from today. And if the value of Apple goes down, the price at which Bitcoin supersedes the fiat value of Apple actually gets lower. So I do understand. That's why I say, all things being equal, the number today is about 153,000 to 155. I believe there's like a 70% chance that this cycle into 2025, we supersede $155,000 of Bitcoin. Now, if Apple doesn't go up dramatically from here, which is a possibility, and especially if Apple goes down from here into 2025, that number is even easier to supersede. And then what? The entire world is short Bitcoin for the most part, which means that they're short the upside of Bitcoin. They don't have it. And so what happens when Bitcoin becomes the most valuable thing on earth outside of gold? Do you think people are going to sell it so readily? What do you sell the most valuable thing on earth for? The 15th most valuable thing? I'm not saying that it won't be sold. I'm just saying that selling Bitcoin will become less of a thing when it becomes the most valuable thing. You don't sell the Mona Lisa for a car. Do you understand? And so that's when I think, of course, in the ecosystem, there are far more options to use the most pristine asset on planet Earth, Bitcoin, to get anything you want, which will further decrease the need for you to sell it to get what you want. And so you're going to have to work for it. It's not going to be readily available on exchanges anymore. And the only way the vast majority of the world is going to gain exposure to the upside potential is through paper Bitcoin. Because I'm not selling my Bitcoin to you. You're probably at that point not going to be selling your Bitcoin to someone else either. You know why? Because you probably won't get it back. Not at the price you sold it for. And so we're going to I think we're going to move far more rapidly to a place, traders, Bitcoiners. I think we're going to move faster than most people think to a place where the world is going to understand what true scarcity in an asset is. Because I think that the vast majority of people have no clue. They can't wrap their hands around what true absolute scarcity is. There is no more, period. And so when Bitcoin becomes the most valuable asset outside of gold, every single financial institution will have to have some allocation to it. How does a financial institution not have allocation to the most valuable thing on earth? Why is Apple the most owned asset on planet Earth? Why is Apple the most owned thing on the planet? Because it is the most valuable thing on the planet outside of gold. And so every financial institution owns Apple, every mutual fund owns Apple, every retirement account either directly or indirectly has exposure to Apple, every index in the world has exposure to Apple. It's the most owned thing because it's the most valuable thing. And that is going to be Bitcoin, in my opinion. There's a 70% chance that that is going to be Bitcoin this cycle. We don't have a lot of time, because when it becomes that, the world, and even before, will have to own it, will have to rush in. And we see what's happening now. It's already disappearing in anticipation of that. Coins are being ripped off of exchange at a rate that has never occurred in history. And that is before this avalanche of need coming in to own the most valuable, what is ultimately going to be the most valuable thing on planet Earth. It's not going to be available. In addition to that, these prices already outprice the majority of the world. So even if it were available, it's not available to the majority of the world in any substantial amounts. It's not available to the majority of the world now at $29,000, $30,000 a coin in substantial amounts. And so the people who are able to get one Bitcoin today had better do it, because in 2025, those same people will never be able to get one Bitcoin ever for the rest of eternity. The majority of them. And in the next cycle, the majority of the people who are able to get a coin at 150, 250,000 will not be able to get a half of one the next one, and then a quarter of one the next cycle, and then a tenth of one the next cycle. And then we're starting to talk about Bitcoin dust. Remember gold dust? Where people used to hold their gold dust in a little pouch in their vest pocket. We start to get into the dust phase of Bitcoin. If you think about it right now, my friend's family, who owns 6 or 7 different properties, their whole wealth, their whole life, their whole work and effort was put into amassing these properties. These properties have an income that support them today. How many Bitcoin? They're millionaires, but they're millionaires in hard illiquid assets. So how many Bitcoin can that family really buy today at 30,000? Not a lot. They're wealthy on paper. They're wealthy from an asset point of view. Most people would say, oh, you're worth $5 or $6 million. You're great. You're good. But it's in real estate. They can't even afford, unless they start selling real estate, of course, they can't afford to just easily, even though they're worth $4 or $5 or $6 million, easily start picking up whole coins. So imagine them being priced out now at being able to accumulate Bitcoin in any substantial amount, and they're millionaires. So imagine at 150,000. Bitcoin is now the most valuable asset on earth. How many Bitcoin can that same family worth $6-7 million be able to buy at 150,000? Probably not many. Maybe not even one. And so Bitcoin is already pricing out millionaires. Do you understand? It's at $30,000, and millionaires can't even gobble up coins because they're millionaires on paper. They're millionaires in fiat denominated assets that aren't liquid, that even if they wanted to sell, they can't sell. And so I just think that the vast majority of people don't understand how fast this can happen, where it's just not available. And so the time, in my opinion, that it's going to take the price out 99% of the world is very, very close. And I say we've got a 70% chance of that being as early as 2025. All right. And so that's really all I was really trying to communicate there. But, you know, when you've got a certain number of characters to communicate something like that in a small tweet, there's no way to be able to sort of delve in and start to pick apart the meat off the bones with a topic like that. All right. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say with that. And let's see, guys, I'm walking while I'm speaking to you, so that's why sometimes I may sound like I'm a bit out of breath. I still don't see anybody writing any comments. Nope. Not a single comment here. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Calvin says, I'm waiting for those buy stops to trigger. Absolutely. Okay, Calvin has a question here. Okay. Will an approved ETF like BlackRock have immediate effect to fiat price? In other words, would the ETF be listed on certain exchanges immediately, or is there a waiting period? By the way, I think your space is pumping Bitcoin. All right, thanks. Bitcoin's pumping? Okay. Is a Bitcoin spot ETF approval going to have a material effect on the fiat price? That remains to be seen, but I believe it will. In fact, how can it not? So I do believe that there is going to be an element of front running a Bitcoin approval process. So I've been in the financial space long enough to know that, you know, big positive news is typically blah, because especially if the big positive news is ubiquitous, which means that if it's known throughout the world already, that the odds are good that BlackRock's going to get an approval, that will be front run. And so upon the news, you typically get the knee-jerk reaction pump. So Bitcoin rises into that approval. The approval actually creates an accelerated pump at a far more accelerated pace, and then it dies out for a while after that, despite the fact that many good things are still to follow because of the approval. Now, the approval doesn't necessarily mean that the ETF is operational from day one. There's also a period from approval to getting up and running. Maybe it's not long because some of those processes or preparatory steps are done before the approval. But still, it's not like approval Friday and the ETF is open on Monday. All right. But the avalanche over time, I believe, is going to be huge. Now, like everything else, there are pros and cons, in my opinion, to a spot Bitcoin ETF. I think in the short to intermediate term, it's extremely bullish. I think later there might be some potential issues, but you know, look, let's face it, guys. If Bitcoin can't handle some of the things that come with the institutions coming into the space, if Bitcoin can't handle some of the negative aspects of a spot ETF, then what are we doing? Right? It's not something that frightens me. Bitcoin is anti-fragile, and I think it's built to be resistant to all forms of attack. It gets stronger every 10 minutes of its life. And every single day it does not go down, every single day that it is not killed, every single day that it does not drop to zero, every single day that it doesn't get hacked is a day that makes Bitcoin exponentially more invincible, and it increases the odds exponentially that it will be a success. And I do say will purposefully. There is a certain element of success that Bitcoin has already achieved, and it's impressive, but it's still far from achieving its ultimate purpose. And so I believe that every single day that it's still here exponentially increases the odds that it's going to achieve that ultimate purpose. All right. Calvin also says, it's crazy how we have 1% adoption, and yet only maybe 20% of those adopters take Bitcoin as a legacy asset. Yeah, we actually don't even have 1%. I think those numbers are quite healthy. I think a far more accurate number is sort of like 0.03%, because I think that when people look at those numbers, they kind of look at the entire crypto shitcoin space. And so when it just comes to Bitcoin, I think it's far smaller. It's a more serious form of adoption, of course, but it's still small. It's still extraordinarily small. And sometimes I sit down and reflect, and no matter how many times I reflect on this, it still astounds me that with just 0.03% of the world having gotten their hands on Bitcoin, that it has with that become the 20th largest currency in the world. With 0.03% adoption, it's become the 12th most valuable asset in the world. With 0.03% adoption, it has become the best performing asset the world has ever seen. It's become a global brand that no matter where you go, anywhere in the world, you can say Bitcoin, and they've heard of it. They may not understand it, but they've heard of it. These are extraordinary accomplishments. It is the first network that has never been hacked in its history. It's the first network that hasn't been down once, hasn't missed a beat, hasn't missed a step in 10 years, a decade. Your bank network goes down multiple times every single hour. Your banks get hacked every single day. It's just not reported because it's so common of an occurrence. There's not a single day a bank doesn't get hacked. There's not a single day a government agency is not hacked. And this is the first network to never, ever be hacked. These are extraordinary accomplishments. And with only 0.03% adoption, it's gone from zero, literally zero, to 30,000 a unit, all right, and a $600 billion asset. It is worth more than every single financial institution on earth. It is worth more than every single bank on earth. It is worth more than most countries are worth on earth. And it's a freaking baby. It's 14. And it makes me laugh when people say it's a bubble. Yet none of those people would ever call their 14-year-old child a bubble. They would never in a million years say, my 14-year-old is finished. He's grown too fast. All right, it's over. His life is over. My 14-year-old's life is over. He's 14, he's too bright, he's over. Or he's too athletic, he's over. Michael Jordan's too good at 14, his career's over. It's ridiculous. There is no legitimate asset that is old at 14. Gold is 6,000 years old. Silver's 9,000 years old. Right? The bond market is arguably 600 years old. We say it's 300 years old. All right, but it's really more like 600 years old. The equity market is what? 250 years old? McDonald's is what? Apple's 46? Microsoft's 45? I may have my numbers off with that, but they're definitely past middle age. They're past 45. Amazon's older. Google's older. And no one would be thinking that Apple at 14 years old was finished. Well, I guess some people did. But it would be silly to say that after 14 years old, the internet's over, that the internet's a bubble. Some people actually said that. But this is ridiculous. How can a bubble keep coming back? The very definition of a bubble is when it's popped, it's gone. It's no longer in existence. You can't call something a bubble after it has come back from a 95% collapse. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 6 times. You can't call that a bubble. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, Calvin, thanks for your questions, man. Anybody else here? Let's see. Anyway. No, I don't see any. I don't see any others here. Oh, here we go. Now I got you. Now I've got it. I see them. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just so unfamiliar with this platform here. Bitmain Bronze is saying, Oliver, what is your choice for a good cold storage wallet since there are so many of them nowadays? I will have to say that I've experimented with a lot of them. All right. And I've done that because, guys, I had as many as 7,000, I'll call them Bitcoiners. These were 7,000 people in my Bitcoin club. All right. We started in April of 2020. And I had as many as 7,000. That number actually grew as high as 9,000. And I got my numbers corrected because I thought it was smaller, but my staff actually corrected me when I said we went as high as 7. No, we had 7 and went as high as 9,000. And during the bear market, that's now at 2,500. So I got 2,500 Bitcoin members. And the whole goal of this is just to become better Bitcoiners. And so I have experimented with virtually, I can't say every cold storage solution out there, but a lot of them. Not because I've necessarily wanted to use them, but just because some of my Bitcoiners had it. So we just did the deep dive on a variety of them. But I will say that out of all the ones I've looked at and have dealt with and have done deep dives on, my favorite is Cold Card. I would say, I don't know, guys. I would say second is Foundation Passport. Okay, so Cold Card number 1, Foundation Passport number 2, and I just there are a fairly decent amount of good ones. I tend to put now um uh Blockstream's Jade at number three. All right, that used to be Trezor's spot, but I've knocked Trezor down to maybe four. And I know there are a variety of other really good ones, but I haven't had the good fortune of sort of doing deep dives on those as of yet. So I can only speak from my experience. So top three, Cold Card, Foundation Passport, and Jade. And I have used all of them, do use all of them. And the reason, the only reason that I actually put Foundation Passport second, it's a close second. Let's just say that. And it's just age. Okay, it's just age. Cold Card's been in it long enough, much longer than Foundation Passport. But I believe they've done a wonderful job at really coming into the space very strongly. I think with the help of Cold Card as well, inadvertently. But still, nonetheless, it's a phenomenal cold storage wallet. What should we do here in India, where crypto is highly taxed and not much clarity about exchanges? Is it safe to buy? In all honesty, I just can't comment on the situation in India so much because I don't know what the tax laws are specifically. And it is something that I should look into because I do have quite a number of people from India who do follow me, especially on YouTube. But anyway, I will say this. If you are not taxed by simply holding it, and you're only taxed upon transfer, upon selling it, all right, then there is absolutely no reason why you should not be buying Bitcoin, right? This is a savings. This is the best savings. At this stage, Bitcoin is the best savings technology on planet Earth. It is not the best payments network. It's getting there. I get it. But right now, it is solving a far bigger problem, in my opinion, a problem that everyone in the world has, which is, where do I store my time? Where do I store the efforts of my labor, the efforts that I don't need right now for milk and sugar and rent? But this is my value, but I would want this value to stay the same value as it is right now. I want it to be the same value for next year because I'm saving up for a home. How fair is it for someone who's saving up for a home that might take them 5 or 6 years to save for, but as they're storing their savings is melting, pushing the 5 or 6 years out to 10 years because the value of their savings is being debased. So the world has a bigger store of value problem today because of the fiat standard, right? And so if you're able to store it and not be taxed, then store it, save in it. Don't think about right now the sell side of the equation. And what a lot of Bitcoiners are willing to do is just wait out the tax laws, because over time, I do believe that Bitcoiners become the intransigent minority to the point where laws have to be made to appease them. Their wealth in aggregate will be too great to ignore, and the number, although minority, will be too big to ignore as well. That's called the intransigent minority. And I believe that once Bitcoiners reach that level of being big enough not to ignore and wealthy enough not to ignore, the rules will bend to them. And so most Bitcoiners have this attitude: I'm just going to hodl. I'm going to out hodl the current tax laws. I'm going to out hodl the hostile takes on Bitcoin. I'm going to out hodl the FUD thrown at Bitcoin. I'm going to out hodl all the negatives that are holding it back right now, all the laws that are constructed against it. I'm just going to hodl and cold storage, and I'm going to wait it out. And I think that's a phenomenal strategy if you can. We're not talking about putting the amount that you need for bread and butter and eggs and taking the bus and train to work. I'm not talking about putting that into Bitcoin. I'm talking about putting the excess into Bitcoin. And everyone has excess. Everyone has excess. All right. And so if the tax laws don't punish you for holding it, then hodl it. And yes, get it. That is your protection, in my opinion. If the tax laws are that you are taxed just by holding it, you'll have to make a calculation for yourself whether or not number go up on average for Bitcoin outpaces the tax rate. And if the answer is yes, you still hodl. All right, so I believe before this bear market, Bitcoin had an annualized CAGR of about 196, if I'm not mistaken, call it 200. I think that number has dropped to around 150. Don't quote me on this, but it's still ridiculous. The closest thing to it is the NASDAQ, which has an annualized 10-year CAGR, cumulative annual growth rate. That's what CAGR stands for. It has a cumulative annualized growth rate of 16.1%. That's the NASDAQ. Meanwhile, Bitcoin's at 150%. And I believe that's going to go up over the next cycle or two. So we'll be back above 200%, in my opinion, on CAGR. And if your tax rate's 30%, I still think it's worth it. Anyway, I hope I've addressed that. What would the cons of a spot ETF be? Paper Bitcoin. That's one con. That's one potential con. Paper Bitcoin. So a spot ETF is supposed to be 1-to-1, right? Which means that for every $1 that comes into spot, you need $1 worth of actual Bitcoin to keep it 1-to-1. Now, the way ETFs work is that it can't be 1-to-1 intraday. So what it is, it works on a mark-to-market basis every single day. So people are buying the ETF throughout the whole day. It doesn't mean that every time someone buys the ETF, that the ETF is now going to the market to buy spot Bitcoin. It doesn't work that way. They accumulate all the buys for the day, all right? They mark Bitcoin to market at that particular point, and then they take that amount, they're supposed to take that amount and buy the equivalent amount of Bitcoin for it, okay? Now, so this keeps a constant demand on the spot price of Bitcoin, all right? And so if, 40% of all IRAs or 401k plans are going to have automatic 1-2% go into Bitcoin at some point in the future, that's just a constant every single week, every single 2 weeks, every single month, just spot buying, spot buying, spot buying. That's the positive. But that Bitcoin that the ETF is holding in custody, what's being done with it? You see, this is where the potential of negativity comes into play, because it's really just supposed to sit there. You're not supposed to do anything with it. But I know Wall Street. I've been in the game for 40 years. Do you understand? Well, 37 years. I've been trading for 43 years, a professional for 37 years in this space. I know what my industry does. I've done it. I was a part of the machinery that papered assets. Do you understand? So I know that Wall Street doesn't let an asset just sit. They're looking at all the ways to take that pristine asset sitting in custody and to do something with it. Now it's going to come down to some of the laws. What does it give the ETF holders that have the Bitcoin in custody? What rights does it give them with the Bitcoin in custody? We have to look at that. We have to see. But that's one of the negatives, because you can also have a scenario where the people that are buying the ETF, they don't really have access to Bitcoin. That's not 100% true, but it's closer to the truth than not. They don't really have Bitcoin, because the only way you really have Bitcoin is to have it, to have the words, right? To have the seed phrase. Your word is your Bitcoin. And that's a beautiful thing too, your word. You know, people used to say, my word is my bond. Now your word is more than your bond. Your word is your Bitcoin. And so if you don't have the word, then you don't have Bitcoin. You have price exposure. You have exposure to the price of Bitcoin, but you don't have Bitcoin if you don't have the words. Okay. And so that's why I say that it's closer to being correct that the buyers of the spot ETF don't have Bitcoin. Now, the reason why I also say it's not 100% true is because there are ways to actually get the Bitcoin if you're like a big institution that owns, you know, certain shares of the ETF and you don't want fiat, you actually demand Bitcoin instead. There are ways to do that. So it's not 100%, but until a company or an institution or a money management firm demands that, they don't really have it. They only have price exposure. So that means, and mark my words, guys, this is how it works. That means that legally the Bitcoin is not theirs. The ETF shares are theirs, but the underlying Bitcoin is legally not theirs, which means that it's legally the trust's Bitcoin, which gives them ownership rights. Ownership is possession is 9/10 of the law, which means that they will have rights to do something with that Bitcoin. The question is what? So those are some of the areas that some very dangerous games can be played with Bitcoin. But I wouldn't be overly concerned with that because of the self-custody aspect of Bitcoin. What limits those games is the fact that you and I pull Bitcoin off exchanges. So as we're pulling our Bitcoin off exchange, as increasing numbers of people are wiping the supply, taking it out of circulation, how do you play the games with that? It's becoming the incredible shrinking asset. You need the asset to remain a certain size to play those games, and it's incredibly shrinking. And so it's sort of like they first have a 2-foot square to play the games in. And now this year, the square is only 1 feet. They can maneuver they can only maneuver in a much smaller space. And now it's a 1/2 foot. And now they're just jumping up and down. They can't even move right to left anymore or front to back. The square is too small. That's how we squeeze them out of those games. I do believe that the institutions are going to do what they only know how to do, which is try to mess with the asset. And I do think that ultimately they are going to get burned. And I think that Bitcoin has the potential of taking out some of the most venerable firms we know today if they do that. Everyone gets wrecked. That is the initiation. I got wrecked. You got wrecked. Everybody must get wrecked. Everybody must get humbled. Everybody must bow the knee. It's the only way. And I am telling you, mark my words, some of the firms with the biggest names, with the best reputations, that are untouchable today, Bitcoin is going to undo their lives because they will not be able to resist playing the games with this asset that they played with every other asset. And mark my words, Bitcoin won't stand for it. Bitcoin will not stand for it. It's not designed that way. And it'll work for a while until the day of reckoning comes. It's going to blow Wall Street up. So if I were an advisor, I'd say, you better watch your step here. This is a completely different species. It doesn't like to be boxed in. It doesn't like to be controlled. It doesn't like to be told what to do. And when that happens, you better protect your life. All right. All right, here. Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, but not the only one. Who says that? You? Do you believe another more advanced crypto, such as Ethereum? You got to be kidding me, right? Could be worth more than Bitcoin someday? First of all, I don't consider anything a cryptocurrency except Bitcoin. They have these organizations, and I'm being generous, these organizations, which the majority of which are nothing more than VC pumps, pump and dumps on the public. That's all they are. That's all the majority of them are. They're VC funded pumps in an unregulated market that these VCs are basically taking advantage of the window they have now because they know it won't last forever. That is why there's 25,000 of them. The same thing happened in the online betting space. The companies knew that the unregulated in America, the unregulated online betting, online gambling, online casino space was going to be regulated. They knew they had a certain period of time. And these people just pumped out as many online casino companies as they could. They were coming out dozens a month because they knew the window was going to close. And guess what? A portion of the same people that rug pulled the online gambling space, a portion of the same people that took advantage of the window in the gambling space are the people who are doing it now in the crypto space. A portion of that industry is playing the same playbook that they played in the unregulated online gambling space. And people lost tens of billions of dollars. They got rug pulled in that space when the hammer came down. And so the first thing is that they're not cryptocurrencies. They're only cryptocurrencies in name. They're basically just VC funded companies. They're penny stocks, all right, that have fluffy valuations that aren't even real. And listen, guys, I've been around this game my whole career. I know how the game is played to create a false valuation. You do it through hiring the very best market makers you can hire. You do it by putting a team of marketers in place that pay news organizations to keep a constant stream of positive news coming out. Your market makers are controlling the price, preventing declines of great magnitude. They're wash trading between each other, and the majority of the float is in the insider's hands. So the reason why these so-called cryptocurrencies need the insiders to own the majority of the shares is because if all of them were out there, it's harder to control the price. You can control the price when 20% of your entire float is on the market. Now your market making firms can wash trade and control the price a little bit better. They can absorb some of the sell demand. They can create buy demand while they keep their marketing machine pumping this story and that story. And this upgrade is coming and that upgrade is coming. It's a freaking industry in search of a problem to solve, run by a bunch of geeks, funded by a bunch of VCs that have been dumping on the public since the mid to late 1990s. They did it in the internet. They did it in the .com space. The same people, the same VC firms did it in the .com space, right? After having tens of thousands of these .com companies, at the end of the day, we were left with 4 of them, just 4 out of tens of thousands. 4. What was it? Amazon, Yahoo, it's just 4 of them was left. They did it in the online gambling space. All of them went under. All right. And now they're doing it in this space. There is no real decentralized cryptocurrency except Bitcoin. These are VC funded pump and dump schemes. And I will tell you this, I believe they're all zero. Some people say, Oliver, no, not all of them. Yes, all of them. It might take some time. It's not going to take time for the majority of them. The majority of them are going to zero practically overnight. They're going to zero literally before your very eyes right now. Just price them against Bitcoin and you'll see practically a straight line to zero. They're all trending towards zero. These valuations are not real. And at the end of the day, they all go bust. All of them go bust. Now, some of the more established ones that have used their fake money to buy a lot of political clout and to buy a lot of support, it might take longer to undo them, but they all are going to collapse into Bitcoin. All of them, every single one. You know why? Because there is no second internet. This is not a game. This is not a game where there's a second. This is like fire, where after the discovery of fire, there's no Fire 2.0. After the internet, there was no second internet. Now, I don't know if many of you were around at this time, but when the internet started to gain some traction, most companies didn't like it because it was open source, was available to the world. They didn't know how to monetize it at that particular time, but they understood the power of the underlying tech, right? So a lot of the companies said they poo-pooed the internet and said, we're going to do intranet. I don't know if many of you, somebody type for me if you remember this time when all the rage in corporate America, all the rage in the institutional space was not the internet. They poo-pooed that because it was too open for them. They wanted the intranet. We don't like the internet. We like the underlying technology of the internet, and we're going to build our own, and they're called intranets. Where are they today? Is there an intranet that exists today? Everyone uses the one internet. Zillions of companies came out with their own version of the internet called their intranet, and they're all zero today. This is the same. There's one internet, and anything that is trying to be an intranet is going to collapse into the one and only one, the internet. This is the same thing that's going on with Bitcoin is the internet of money. All of these other crappy things are pretending to be the intranet version. Oh, we don't like Bitcoin, but we like the underlying tech of Bitcoin called blockchain. It's the same story I've seen repeated over and over and over again in my industry. They all collapse into the one. All right? They all collapse into the one. So there are certain industries, there are certain things that there is only one of. There's only one electricity. There's only one fire. There's only one internet. And there's only one cryptocurrency. There's only one. And you can't have another, not a real one at least. And all of these fake attempts are ultimately going to collapse into Bitcoin. They all are. All you have to do is go to TradingView and type, all right, BTC / any other symbol you want. BTC / ETH, BTC / ADA, BTC / Solana, BTC / all of them. And you'll see that all of them, except maybe 3, are trending towards zero. And those other 3 just need a little bit more time. That's all. That's all. So no, there is nothing more advanced. There is nothing more advanced. That's all marketing. And there's not a single project that is finished. I can't believe how many people are fooled by this. There's not a single project finished. This is crazy. Billions and billions, supposedly billions and billions of value, and they're not even done yet. It's not even finished. It's not even really freaking working. This is insane to me. First, it started off with the ICO craze. All people had to do during the ICO craze was to show up with a piece of paper, a white paper, and they got tens of millions of dollars for a piece of paper with some contraption outlined on the piece of paper. This is what this blockchain is going to be and do and accomplish. And they showed up with a paper, they got VC money. All right, so now that didn't work. So now we got to show something. And so they show all of these contraptions that are not even close to being able to do anything they promise. So that's the second stage. Can't just show a paper anymore. I got to show something. Doesn't have to be complete, but I got to show something moving. I got to show this wheel moving over here. It goes down all the time, but that's okay. It gets hacked every other week, but that's okay. It hasn't accomplished anything that we promised yet, but that's okay. At least it's more than a piece of paper now. This is insane. What a lot of people don't realize here, guys, is that you can't mess with the trifecta of a cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin got the trifecta correctly. It's a 3-point system, right? Security, decentralization, right? Security, decentralization, and privacy. I think this is the third one. But anyway, the point I'm trying to say is, if you take one of those points and say, for instance, or it's speed, right? So if you take the point of speed and say, oh, Bitcoin's slow, so we're going to up the speed of our blockchain. But when you up that one item, you collapse the others, and it doesn't work. So if you do too much of one thing, you collapse the other two. It has to remain a perfect triangle. So all of these projects that's being generous, they grab one of these items, put some marketing around it and say, okay, we're going to take the speed point and we're going to market against Bitcoin with the speed point. But then you collapse decentralization and security. That's it. Speed, decentralization, and security. So if you up the speed, you collapse the other two, right? If you up the security, like Monero, if you up the security and the privacy, you collapse the other two. You can't grab one of these and make it improvement. Bitcoin got it perfect the first time, and you can't get perfection again. You can't discover again. You can't rediscover fire. There's no second time. Once the atom was discovered, it can't be discovered anymore. It's already done. It's already discovered. I mean, maybe the only time was when Christopher Columbus came to America and said he discovered it and it was already discovered, but barring that, you can't discover something again. You know, it doesn't work that way. I know I'm pissing off all the people who are not Bitcoin maxis here, but this is my channel. All right. Do I think that BlackRock could make an attempt to buy 50+% of Bitcoin? They could. First of all, there's not 50% of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network, available for sale. Like, have you seen the number that is available on exchanges? The number is like 1.88, 1.9 million Bitcoin available on exchanges today. And I think that number is artificially high, because isn't some of that Bitcoin just custodian? Isn't that custodian Bitcoin that is custody by them, some of it? Anyway, the point is, how do they get 50%? You're giving up yours to them? I'm not giving up mine to them. I know a lot of people on this call right now. I know I don't have a lot of people on the call, but a good portion of the people I have on the call, they ain't giving up their Bitcoin to BlackRock. Where are they going to freaking get it from? Now, so let's just assume that they can start driving the price high enough to shake out I'm not going to be shaken out, but to shake out some of the Bitcoin from you. They get it to 600, 700,000, where some of you will let your Bitcoin go. Some of the old OGs that have been holding on for this are so wealthy from a fiat perspective, they give up half of their stake at 700,000, 600,000, 900, whatever. Let's say they can get it to a price where it shakes so many wallets that were hodling, and they shake the Bitcoin loose to the point where they have 52% of all available Bitcoin in the world. Let's say that gets accomplished. So what? So what? Like, what does that do? All right, so they're 52% owners of all the Bitcoin, which I don't think is possible, but we're running with this experiment. What does that do? This is a proof of work mechanism. You're thinking about proof of stake. That's what proof of stake is. Proof of stake is, the bigger my stake, the more control I have over the protocol. The more control I have over the monetary system. I have control to change the rules because I own 52%. My stake is bigger than yours. This is not proof of stake. Bitcoin's not proof of stake. Bitcoin is proof of work. Owning 52% gives you no extra rights than the person who owns one freaking Satoshi. You're all equal when it comes to proof of work. Your work is proven to be more. That's why you have more Bitcoin. That's fine. But that proof of work does not give you any additional right over any other Bitcoiner, no matter how much they have. So let's not mix up the protocols here. Proof of stake is the larger your stake, the more control. Proof of work has nothing to do with ownership. Now, another question, follow-up question, is maybe a little bit more relevant, where what if BlackRock gains more than 51% of Bitcoin's hash rate? Now, that's a little bit more, that's got a little bit more teeth to it. So you know how BlackRock's been buying into all of these miners, these public miners? So what if there were a way, I don't think it is, but what if, let's run with the experiment, there was a way for them to accumulate control of so much mining hash power that they actually control over 51% of the hash rate, which would mean that they are going to mine, on average, more than half of the Bitcoin that comes into existence through the issuance rate, right? This gives them greater ability to do what's called a 51% attack on the network. But why? First of all, if they could pull that off, and I don't believe it's possible, but if they could pull that off, what would a 51% attack be done for? It would literally be an attack on the very wealth that they themselves have accumulated through Bitcoin. The incentives for Bitcoin are so powerful that it aligns everyone into one. We all become aligned because the incentives of Bitcoin are so powerful that even the enemy, what starts off as the enemy, becomes a supporter, because all of that effort, instead of the effort of attacking Bitcoin, you could actually get wealthier if you use the effort to help Bitcoin. So it doesn't even make sense from an incentive point of view. But let's say they're just co-opted by a nation state like the United States, and they want Bitcoin done. And so with a 50%, 51% attack, let's say they fork Bitcoin. They fork it. That's the danger, because a double spend doesn't really do very much. You only get one shot at that. And the way the protocol is built is that the longest chain is always the one that the nodes and the miners, the nodes actually accept. So how do you build a longer chain than Bitcoin's chain? How is that even done? Well, we just crossed the 800,000 block level for Bitcoin a couple days ago, right? How do you create a longer chain from that? It takes 10 minutes to create a block. Now, how do you surpass Bitcoin starting now? You're going to build a longer chain than Bitcoin. How do you do that? I just don't see how that's possible. But let's say they do a fork of Bitcoin, because in the language of their spot ETF is that they have the right to choose which Bitcoin is the right Bitcoin, which Bitcoin they deem the right Bitcoin. That's a little disturbing language, but it's there. So that leads me to believe that there could be the possibility where their idea is, we're going to fork Bitcoin if they ever got over 51%. And you would need way more than 51%, by the way, guys, because Even the smallest slippage back to 50% ruins your plans and all the money you spent. So you got to get way past 51%, which is very, very difficult to do. And remember, there's still, let's say you get to 60%, there's still 40% out there. Now, BlackRock forks Bitcoin into Black Bitcoin. They create a new version of Bitcoin called Black Bitcoin. Every existing Bitcoin owner gets an equal amount of the new Black Bitcoin. So if you have 4 Bitcoin and BlackRock forks Bitcoin to their version of a new Bitcoin called Black Bitcoin, you will get 4 Black Bitcoin. Now, what do you think you're going to instantly be incentivized to do with the Black Bitcoin? Sell it instantly to put that into the real Bitcoin. This is what happens to every fork that has happened to Bitcoin. The real Bitcoiners get the new fork in the equal amount, and they dump the junk to get more Bitcoin, causing the fork Bitcoin to go in a spiral downward forever until it's gone. Guys, look, Bitcoin is so anti-fragile, it's mind-bending. I mean, the way this is built is just, it blows my mind. That it's protecting it. The network pays its own army to protect itself. What the army is the miners. What the 40% of the miners that are not controlled, which chain do you think they're going to accept? Which Bitcoin is their real Bitcoin? Which Bitcoin is your real Bitcoin? Which Bitcoin is my real Bitcoin? It's certainly not the BlackRock's. The miners will get the equivalent BlackRock Bitcoin, dump it for more Bitcoin. You will dump it for more Bitcoin. I will dump it for more Bitcoin. First of all, if this is the plan, by the time they can even get close to trying to do something like this, they're already a friend of Bitcoin. That's how powerful the incentives of Bitcoin are. You come in as an enemy, wanting to do your own thing, and you ultimately become a friend. And if you happen to be one of those rare people that are so egotistical that you can't accept the fact that Bitcoin is the king, and so you're just going to go do your own anyway, you just get crushed. And that's what's happened to every person or entity that's tried to fork Bitcoin and do another one. They're all trending toward zero, all of them. All right, guys. This was cool. This was cool. I like it. I like it. Seems there instead of it. Good man says, I had a feeling you're going to say cold card. Yes. Andre says, could listen to you talk for hours, inspiring. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's right. Money's for enemies. And guys, let me just close out on that. I'm going to close out on this point because I got to go, but this has been great with you guys. You know, guys, I would just be careful about feeling that BlackRock should not be getting in. What are they doing? Why are we happy about the institutions coming? Guys, everybody's coming. What are you talking about? The whole world is coming. This is going to be for everybody. Do you understand? It's not going to be like, oh, but not for the institutions. Dude, the institutions are coming. Everybody, the nation states are coming. The good ones, the bad ones, the ones in between, the little institutions, the big ones, The banks are coming. The Federal Reserve banks are coming. Everybody's coming. Do you understand? Everybody. That's the whole freaking point. That Bitcoin is going to, in my opinion, absorb all value of the world over time. Everybody's coming. It's for everybody. So I would tread lightly on this idea that, oh, they're bad. They're going to be bad for Bitcoin. Everybody's coming. And you know what? Let the bad ones come too. Because if, like I said earlier, if Bitcoin can't handle a spot ETF run by the biggest money manager in the world, that's okay. But if Bitcoin can't survive that, then why am I putting all my wealth into it? I want to know that now. I say, bring it. Bring your attacks on Bitcoin because I need the proof over and over again. Bring it. I believe Bitcoin is made for these attacks. I believe it's built to withstand these attacks. I believe that the opportunity to kill it is long gone. The opportunity to stop it, that opportunity existed, but they messed it up. It went by unnoticed because it was too small, and that was by design. I also think that these shitcoins and these altcoins, they do a justice to Bitcoin. They do not hurt Bitcoin. I don't buy into that narrative. I don't like them because they're liars, and all they do is try to kill Bitcoin to prop up their BS. But I will say this, at the end of the day, they support Bitcoin. Do you know why? Because they took the attention off of Bitcoin so that it could get stronger, bigger, better, more invincible. Look at where all the regulatory focus is while Bitcoin, TikTok, next block, right? Look at where all the attacks are. Are the attacks on Bitcoin now? No, they're on everything else. All right. All the regulatory stuff is pointed elsewhere. It's not really pointed at Bitcoin because it can't be pointed at Bitcoin. And so they are deflecting, they're receiving all the arrows while Bitcoin gets a free pass on an unfettered pathway. Everything ultimately is good for Bitcoin. Every attack makes it stronger. Every banning or an attempt to ban shows you that the only thing you're banning is yourself from Bitcoin. You're not banning Bitcoin at all. Every country that's tried to kill it, adoption has risen in that country on average by 400%. Countries won't even dare say that anymore. One stupid country did the other day, but aside from the really stupid ones, they don't even talk about banning Bitcoin anymore because they have realized it doesn't work, that Bitcoin gets stronger every time I ban it. China banned Bitcoin mining. Temporarily, it took a hit and came back with a vengeance that no one on planet Earth could have imagined. No one would have predicted how fast, how quickly Bitcoin's hash rate recovered and went to screaming all-time new highs. This is crazy. And I believe that BlackRock, now I'm going to be a little conspiratorial here. I believe BlackRock was either involved in the whole collapse of the shitcoin industry, the Celsiuses of the world, the BlockFis, the Voyagers, the Three Arrows Capital, the USTs, all of them, the FTXs, the Lunas. I think they either had a hand in that, especially on the FTX side, or they sat back and watched. And I believe they said, if Bitcoin can't be killed with this, after throwing everything but the kitchen, and including the kitchen sink at Bitcoin, by ripping from under it every single company, every single institution that claim to be supporting it and being involved in it. And Bitcoin couldn't even drop lower than any of its former drops in its whole history. Do you guys realize this was the most shallow bear market in Bitcoin's history? Think about this. The most shallow drop in the whole history of Bitcoin was at a time during the most vicious bear market, when all of the collapses happened all at once. Tens upon tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars lost, wiped out, people hurt, destroyed, their lives gone. And it had the most shallow drop in its whole history and came roaring back like a vengeance off the lows. I think that's when BlackRock said, you know what? If you can't kill it, we got to join this thing. This was supposed to kill it. This was supposed to at least make it irrelevant. Look at this thing. We've got to join this thing. Now, that's a little conspiratorial, but it's so strange that they finally came out and said, you know what? After it's up almost 100% off the low, 80%, 70%, whatever it is. Almost 100% off the low. You're like, you know what? Let's just get in. We got to get into this thing. But that is crazy when you think about it. You would think that Bitcoin has never gone through an economic period where interest rates were being raised. No one in existence experienced interest rates raised at the rate at which they were. Bitcoin never experienced that. Bitcoin never had a tightened monetary policy, never lived through a tightened monetary policy, never lived through perpetual rising rates, never lived through a recession, and never lived through so many attacks and so many collapses all at once. And yet it had, throughout all of that, the shallowest pullback of its entire life. Oh my goodness. That should be proof. Listen, I'm in the space of financial markets. I know that is a wonder to the professionals out there that are watching this. I know the institutions have that fact at their fingertips. I know they watch those things. That's meaningful to them, that this thing couldn't even break its last low. This thing, the last low was 3,200. This low was 15,600. Are you kidding me? That's 8 times higher. Well, no, that's not 8 times higher, but you know what I'm saying? That's like 3 times higher. It couldn't even experience the worst time of its life and pull back more than the last time that it pulled back and everything was rosy. Oh my goodness. In financial markets, guys, that's huge. That's huge. And so they're here. And we shouldn't hate it, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, everybody's going to be here. Everybody's coming. All right, guys, I love you to death. All right, guys, thank you for dealing with me on Twitter. Thank you for arguing with me sometimes, too. That helps me to sort of refine my points or what have you. And sometimes I get convinced by you as well, by that as well. Like I told you, I'm still a baby. But stay close. I want to do these a little bit more often. And for those of you who are at nighttime, it's nighttime for me. Have a good night's rest. We're back at the game of markets tomorrow, and I'll be tweeting at you.
My name is Oliver Velez, and I am your 13%er Bitcoiner. Be safe out there, and until next time.
Boom!